My mother slept with my fiancé and returned, crawling back with a ridiculous request. My mother pulled me aside during the rehearsal dinner and said, "I slept with Robbie last week." Robbie was my fiancé of 4 years. I thought she was making some kind of sick joke until I saw the guilt in her eyes. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to. She actually reached for my hand like we were going to bond over this. I found Robbie outside smoking with his groomsmen. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. Just shrugged and said my mom had come on to him and he was weak. Like sleeping with your future mother-in-law was equivalent to eating an extra slice of cake. I called off the wedding that night. Sent a mass text to all the guests that it was canceled due to irreconcilable differences. Moved out of our apartment the next day while Robbie was at work. Blocked them both on everything and started rebuilding my life. The promotion I'd been putting off to focus on wedding planning suddenly became my priority. Within 6 months, I was regional manager making twice what Robbie made. I bought a townhouse in the arts district and adopted 2 rescue cats. Started therapy and joined a hiking group where I met actual friends who weren't toxic. My therapist helped me realize my mother had been competing with me my whole life. Wearing inappropriate outfits to my graduations. Flirting with my high school boyfriends. This was just her biggest betrayal yet. I grieved the mother I'd never really had and started building boundaries. 8 months after the canceled wedding, my mother showed up at my office. Not to apologize, but with tears streaming down her face asking for help. She'd been trying to reach me for weeks, but I'd blocked her everywhere. "I need you to talk to Robbie for me." She clutched a tissue dramatically. "He won't return my calls." The audacity made me laugh out loud. She'd destroyed my engagement and now wanted me to fix her relationship with my ex. But she wasn't done. She explained that she and Robbie had been seeing each other since the wedding was canceled. That they were in love. That age was just a number. "I need you to be my maid of honor." She said it completely straight-faced. "You're marrying my ex-fiancé?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We're soulmates. You have to understand. And you still have all those vendor contacts. The venue might give us the same date since you canceled so last minute." She wanted to use my wedding venue, my vendors, my plans. She'd already told family I was supportive and happy for them. Posted on Facebook about how mature I was being. Even used the engagement photos locations I'd scouted, just cropping me out and inserting herself. "The family thinks it's beautiful how we're handling this." She pulled out her phone to show me. "Look, I'm wearing your grandmother's ring. Robbie said you'd want me to have it." The ring I'd worn for 6 months. The one my dying grandmother had given me specifically. Now on my mother's finger as she planned to marry my ex. I wanted to scream but stayed calm. Told her I needed time to process this request. For the next 2 weeks, she bombarded me with messages about dress shopping, cake tasting, and bachelorette party planning. She sent me links to mother of the bride dresses asking if I thought they were too young for her. She wanted the same photographer, the same flowers, the same everything I'd planned. "You did such beautiful work planning before. Why waste it?" She texted at 2 a.m. I met with my friend who was a party planner. We spent hours crafting the perfect response. I reached out to family members and learned she'd been lying extensively. Told them I'd begged her to take Robbie off my hands. That I'd realized we weren't compatible and pushed them together. My aunt revealed that mom had been pursuing Robbie throughout our entire relationship. Showing up at his gym, texting him constantly, getting his help with house repairs when I was traveling for work. The seduction had been years in the making. I documented everything and prepared for the confrontation. We met at a neutral restaurant where she immediately started talking about centerpieces and asking if I still had the wedding favor samples. I let her ramble for exactly 5 minutes. Then I slid my phone across the table showing a Facebook post I'd just published. It detailed exactly what happened. How she'd slept with my fiancé. How she was now trying to use my wedding plans. How she'd lied to everyone about my support. "Take that down immediately." She grabbed for my phone. "How could you do this to me? The same way you did it to me. Publicly and without remorse." I pulled my phone back. She started crying about her reputation. How I was ruining her happiness. How Robbie would leave her if there was drama. But I stood up to leave until she grabbed my wrist desperately. "Wait! There's something else. I'm pregnant. Robbie doesn't know yet. Please." I stare at my mother across the restaurant table. Her words about being pregnant hitting me like a second punch after the first one. She watches my face with this desperate look, waiting for me to react, to say something that makes this okay for her. I don't give her the satisfaction. My hands grip the edge of the table because they're shaking, and I refuse to let her see how much this news shakes me. The pregnancy feels like another weapon she's pulling out, another way to drag me back into her chaos when I've worked so hard to get free. She reaches across the table like she's going to grab my hand again, but I pull back fast. I stand up and my chair scrapes loud against the floor. She starts talking fast about how she needs my support, how family is supposed to be there for each other, how I'm the only one who can help her figure out how to tell Robbie. I cut her off and tell her I need to leave and think about what she just told me. My voice comes out steady, even though everything inside me feels like it's breaking apart again. She grabs my wrist as I pick up my purse and I yank my arm away harder than I mean to. I gather my phone and keys and walk toward the restaurant exit without looking back at her. Behind me, I hear her calling my name, but I keep walking, pushing through the door and out into the parking lot. The cold air hits my face and I realize I'm breathing too fast, almost gasping. I make it to my car and get inside, locking the doors immediately like she might chase after me. She doesn't. Through the restaurant window, I can see her still sitting at our table with her head in her hands, I sit there for 20 minutes before I can even put the key in the ignition. My mind keeps racing through what this pregnancy means. My mother is going to have a baby with my ex-fiancé. I'm going to have a half-sibling who is also technically nothing to me because Robbie and I aren't together anymore. The whole situation is so messed up I almost want to laugh, except nothing about this is funny. I pull out my phone and text Margot asking if she can come over tonight because I need to talk to someone I trust. She texts back within 2 minutes saying she'll be there at 7 with wine and food. I finally start my car and drive home on autopilot, barely remembering the turns I take to get to my townhouse. My cats meet me at the door meowing for dinner like this is a normal day. I feed them and then just sit on my couch staring at nothing until Margot knocks. She arrives exactly at 7 carrying 2 bottles of wine and a bag of Thai takeout. She takes one look at my face and immediately pulls me into a hug. I don't cry, but I hold on to her for a long minute before we go inside. We sit at my kitchen table and I tell her about the pregnancy while she opens the wine and starts unpacking containers of pad thai and spring rolls. I watch her expression shift from shock to anger to this focused, strategic look she gets when she's planning events. She asks me specific questions about what my mother said, what she wants from me, whether Robbie knows yet. I answer everything while picking at my food. Not really hungry, but eating anyway because Margot keeps pushing the containers toward me. We spend the next 3 hours mapping out what this pregnancy means legally and emotionally. Margot pulls out her laptop and starts making notes like she's planning one of her events, except this is my life we're organizing. She suggests I need to talk to her mother Judith, who specializes in family law. I've met Judith twice at Margot's family dinners and she seemed sharp and kind. Margot texts her right there asking if she can see me this week. Judith responds saying she can fit me in Thursday afternoon. I realize sitting there with Margot's help that I need professional guidance to navigate this situation without getting pulled back into my mother's chaos. This isn't something I can handle alone just by blocking phone numbers and avoiding places. My mother is pregnant, and that's going to be a permanent connection whether I want it or not. Margot stays until almost midnight, helping me write down everything that happened tonight so I have a clear record. She makes me promise to text her tomorrow and to call if my mother tries to contact me again. After she leaves, I take a long shower and try to sleep, but I keep seeing my mother's face when she told me about the pregnancy, that mix of desperation and manipulation. The next morning, I call my therapist's office as soon as they open and explain I need an emergency session. The receptionist asks if I'm in crisis, and I say no, but I need to talk to someone today if possible. She puts me on hold and comes back saying my therapist had a cancellation at 3 that afternoon. I take it immediately and rearrange my work schedule to make it happen. At the session, I sit in the familiar chair across from my therapist and tell her about the restaurant confrontation and the pregnancy announcement. She listens without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finish, she asks me how I feel about the news and I realize I don't even know. Angry, definitely. Hurt that my mother keeps finding new ways to betray me. Worried about what this means for my boundaries and my peace. We work through my initial shock, and she helps me identify this pregnancy announcement as another form of control and attention-seeking from my mother. She points out how my mother waited until after I posted the truth on Facebook to tell me, using the pregnancy as a way to pull me back in when I was setting boundaries. My therapist asks me what I think I owe my mother, and I say nothing. She nods and says, "That's right. I don't owe my mother anything, including my emotional energy or involvement in her choices." We spend the rest of the session talking about what healthy boundaries look like when family members make choices you don't support. By the time I leave, I feel clearer about what I need to do next. Thursday afternoon, I meet with Judith at her law office downtown. Her office is professional but warm, with family photos on the credenza and actual books on the shelves instead of just law volumes. Judith greets me with a firm handshake and offers me coffee, which I accept. We sit in comfortable chairs near the window and she pulls out a legal pad. I tell her everything that's happened, starting from the rehearsal dinner betrayal through yesterday's pregnancy announcement. She takes detailed notes and asks clarifying questions about the grandmother's ring, the Facebook posts, the vendor contacts my mother wants to use. When I finish talking, she sits back and reviews her notes with this calm, professional look that makes me feel like maybe this situation can be managed after all. She explains that the grandmother's ring is likely mine legally, since it was a conditional gift for my marriage that never happened. She says we have several options for recovering it, including a formal demand letter or small claims court if necessary. We discuss what boundaries I want to set going forward and what legal tools we have to enforce them. Judith advises me to document every interaction with my mother from now on, keep all texts and emails, don't delete anything no matter how upsetting. She suggests sending a formal letter outlining my boundaries and making it clear that I'm not involved in this pregnancy or their relationship. She offers to draft the letter for a reasonable fee, and I immediately accept. Having a lawyer send it feels more official, more final than anything I could write myself. We spend another 30 minutes going over specific scenarios and how to handle them. By the time I leave Judith's office, I have a clear action plan and actual legal support. That weekend, I go hiking with my group, needing to get out in nature and feel normal for a few hours. We take a moderate trail through the state park, the kind with enough elevation to make you work, but not so steep you can't talk. One of the women, Sarah, notices I seem distracted and asks if I'm okay. I end up sharing a brief version of what's happening, keeping it vague but honest enough. The response surprises me. 2 other women immediately share their own stories of family betrayal and cutting off toxic relatives. Sarah tells me about going no contact with her sister 3 years ago, and how much peace it brought her. Another woman, Jennifer, talks about setting boundaries with her mother and how hard but necessary it was. By the time we finish the hike, I feel less alone in this situation. These women get it. They don't judge me or tell me family is family and I should forgive. They validate my anger and support my boundaries and remind me that I'm not crazy for protecting myself. We grab coffee after the hike and exchange numbers, and I realize I've built something real here. A support system that has nothing to do with my old life or my mother's drama. Monday morning, my phone starts buzzing with texts from my mother before I even finish my coffee. The first one asks what I think of the name Oliver for a boy. The second asks if sage green or pale yellow would be better for a nursery. The third rambles about whether Robbie seems like the kind of guy who would get up for midnight feedings. I stare at my phone feeling sick to my stomach that she thinks I want any part of this. More texts come in throughout the day, each one more detailed and invasive than the last. She sends links to cribs and asks my opinion on different stroller brands. She wants to know if I think Robbie will be hands-on, or if she'll be doing most of the parenting alone. I don't respond to a single message, but I screenshot every one of them and email the whole batch to Judith with a note saying the harassment is continuing. Tuesday brings more of the same, with my mother now texting about pediatricians and asking if I remember which doctor I had as a baby. Wednesday, she sends photos of baby clothes asking which ones I think would look best. By Thursday, I have over 40 screenshots documenting her complete disregard for my boundaries. Friday afternoon, I'm at my desk finishing up a client proposal when the receptionist calls my extension. Her voice sounds uncertain when she tells me my mother is in the lobby asking to see me. My stomach drops because this is exactly what I was afraid would happen. I thank her for the warning and immediately walk down to HR on the 3rd floor. Corbin McKenzie sits behind his desk reviewing something on his computer when I knock on his open door. He looks up and gestures for me to come in, his expression professional but kind. I explain that my mother showed up at my office 8 months ago during a personal crisis, and now she's back again despite me making it clear I don't want contact with her. I tell him about the pregnancy situation, and the constant texting, and how I'm concerned this will keep happening. Corbin listens carefully and takes notes, then pulls up the company's workplace harassment and personal safety policy on his screen. He walks me through the relevant sections and assures me that employees have the right to feel safe at work. He picks up his phone and calls down to building security, giving them my mother's description and instructions to escort her out. Then he asks me to email him a photo of her so they can flag her in the system and prevent her from accessing the building without proper clearance in the future. I send the photo from my phone right there in his office, feeling relieved that someone is finally taking this seriously. Corbin tells me to contact him immediately if she tries anything else, and that HR will document this incident in case we need to pursue further action. I head back upstairs feeling more secure knowing there's now an official record and actual security measures in place. An hour later, my boss, Augustine Larson, stops by my desk and asks if I have a few minutes to talk in his office. My heart races, wondering if the HR situation is going to affect my job somehow. But when we sit down in his office with the door closed, his expression is concerned rather than stern. He tells me Corbin gave him a heads up about the situation downstairs, and he wanted to check in personally to make sure I'm okay. I feel my eyes start to water because I wasn't expecting this kind of support. Augustine assures me that my job performance has been excellent, and that dealing with personal crises doesn't make me any less valuable as an employee. He says the company takes employee safety seriously, and I shouldn't hesitate to use whatever resources I need. He even offers to adjust some of my project deadlines if the stress is affecting my work, though I tell him I'm managing okay professionally. Walking back to my desk, I feel grateful that I have this job and this boss instead of being stuck in some place that wouldn't care about employee well-being. 3 days later, Judith emails me a copy of the formal demand letter she's sending to my mother. I read through it carefully, impressed by how firm but professional the language is. The letter requires my mother to return my grandmother's ring within 30 days, cease using any of my wedding vendors or plans, and directs all future contact to go through legal representation only. It outlines the facts of the situation without being emotional or accusatory, just stating clearly what needs to happen. Judith explains that sending this through certified mail creates a paper trail and puts my mother on notice that I have legal representation. She says most people take these letters seriously once they realize you're not messing around. I authorize her to send it and feel a sense of relief that someone else is handling the official communication, so I don't have to engage directly. 2 days after the letter goes out, my mother sends me an email that's 3 pages long and completely unhinged. She starts by saying I'm being cruel and heartless during the most vulnerable time of her life. She accuses me of trying to ruin her happiness and steal her fiancé even though I'm the one who didn't want him. She claims I'm threatening her and the baby and that the stress I'm causing could harm her pregnancy. The email rambles between guilt trips about how she raised me alone and sacrificed everything for me, to accusations that I've always been jealous of her youth and beauty, to desperate pleas for me to understand that she and Robbie are soulmates. She says my grandmother would be ashamed of how I'm acting, and that I'm being selfish and immature. The whole thing reads like someone having a breakdown, and I feel nothing but disgust reading it. I don't respond at all, just forward the entire email to Judith with a note that says, my mother is not respecting the boundary about going through legal representation. Judith replies within an hour saying this email actually helps our case because it shows my mother's state of mind and her refusal to follow proper channels. She tells me to keep not responding directly, no matter what my mother sends. That same evening, my phone buzzes with a text from a number I don't have saved anymore, but I recognize immediately. Robbie's message says he heard about the legal letter and wants to know if we can talk about keeping things civil for the baby's sake. He says he understands I'm hurt, but we're going to be connected through this child whether I like it or not, so we should figure out how to coexist peacefully. The nerve of him texting me after 8 months of silence makes my blood boil. He thinks he can sleep with my mother, get her pregnant, and then ask me to make things convenient for him. I stare at the message for a full minute considering all the things I want to say back. But then I remember Judith's advice about not engaging, and I simply don't respond. I don't block the number because Judith said to keep documentation of any contact attempts, but I refuse to give him the satisfaction of a reply. The next afternoon, my aunt calls while I'm making dinner for myself and the cats. She sounds upset when she tells me that my mother posted on Facebook, claiming I'm threatening her and trying to steal her engagement ring. My aunt read the post out loud, and it's full of lies about how I've been harassing her and demanding she return jewelry that Robbie gave her as a gift. She's painting herself as the victim of my jealousy and rage, saying she's afraid for her safety and the baby's safety because of my behavior. My aunt says several family members have already commented with supportive messages for my mother and asking what's wrong with me. I feel furious that she's spreading these lies publicly, but I force myself to stay calm. I call Judith immediately, and she listens to the situation, then advises me to let my mother keep digging her own hole with lies while we build our factual case. She reminds me that we have documentation of everything, including the demand letter, that clearly states the ring belonged to my grandmother. She says people who lie publicly usually end up getting caught, and it's better to let that happen naturally than to engage in a Facebook war. But I can't just let these lies stand without saying anything. I spend the evening drafting and redrafting a response, trying to keep it brief and factual without being emotional or accusatory. Finally, I settle on a simple statement that says the ring in question belonged to my grandmother and was given to me before she passed away, and that I've asked for its return through my attorney, as is my legal right. I post it on my own Facebook page, tag no one, and keep it completely neutral in tone. Then I log off social media completely because I don't want to see whatever response my mother posts or what other family members say. Within an hour, my phone starts getting notifications of private messages, and I make myself wait until morning to check them. The next day, I open Facebook to find messages from several family members I haven't heard from in years. 2 of my cousins send long apologies saying they believed my mother's version of events, but now realize she was lying. One cousin says she always knew my mother was competitive with me, but didn't realize how far she'd take it. Another cousin offers to testify on my behalf if this ends up in court, saying she remembers when my grandmother gave me the ring and that it was clearly meant for me. My uncle on my father's side sends a message saying he's sorry he didn't reach out sooner and that he supports me setting boundaries with toxic family members. Even a few of my mother's friends send private messages saying they saw through her lies and think what she did was wrong. Reading these messages feels validating but also complicated because I wonder where all these people were 8 months ago when this first happened. Still, it helps to know that at least some family members see the truth and aren't buying my mother's victim act. I respond to each message briefly, thanking them for their support but not getting into details about the situation. The whole thing leaves me feeling drained, but also more confident that I'm doing the right thing by maintaining my boundaries and not letting my mother manipulate me back into her chaos. Sunday morning, I woke up to my doorbell ringing over and over again. I checked my phone and it was barely 8 in the morning. The doorbell kept going and then I heard my mother's voice calling through the door asking me to please open up and talk to her. I stayed in bed with my heart racing and grabbed my phone to start recording. She kept talking about how she just wanted to explain things and how I was being unfair by shutting her out during such an important time in her life. She said she needed her daughter right now and that family was supposed to support each other no matter what. I recorded 3 full minutes of her pleading and making herself sound like the victim before she finally gave up and left. I sent the audio file to Judith right away with a message explaining that my mother had violated the demand letter by showing up at my home. Judith called me back within an hour, even though it was Sunday. She listened to the recording and told me this was serious because we had specifically outlined no contact in the demand letter. She said if my mother showed up again, we should think about filing for a protection order to legally keep her away from me. The idea of needing a court order to protect myself from my own mother made me feel sick to my stomach, but I agreed it might be needed. Judith said she would document this incident and add it to our file in case we had to go that route. I spent the rest of Sunday feeling anxious and checking my doorbell camera every few minutes to make sure my mother hadn't come back. My therapy appointment was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, and I had a lot to talk about. I sat down in my therapist's office and told her about the pregnancy announcement, the Facebook drama, and now my mother showing up at my house. My therapist listened carefully and then said something that hit me hard. She said we needed to work on accepting that my mother might never be the parent I deserved or needed. We talked about how I'd spent my whole life hoping my mother would change and become the supportive, loving parent I wanted. My therapist explained that I was grieving 2 losses at once. The mother I actually had who kept hurting me, and also the mother I wished I had but never would. She said it was okay to protect myself from the real relationship while still feeling sad about the relationship I'd never get to have. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally tired, but also a bit more clear about what I needed to do. I had to stop hoping my mother would suddenly become different and focus on keeping myself safe from who she actually was. That Thursday evening, Margot called and invited me to have dinner with her family on Saturday night. She said her parents wanted to meet me and her siblings would be there too. I felt nervous about meeting her whole family, but also curious about what a normal family dinner looked like. Saturday came and I drove to Margot's parents' house in a quiet neighborhood with big trees lining the street. Her mom answered the door with a warm smile and welcomed me inside. The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Margot's dad shook my hand, and her two brothers were setting the table while her younger sister poured drinks. Everyone talked and laughed easily with each other. Her mom asked me about my job and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Her dad told funny stories about Margot when she was little. Her siblings teased each other, but in a way that felt loving instead of mean. I watched how they all listened to each other and made space for everyone to talk. Nobody talked over anyone else or made everything about themselves. When Margot's mom brought out dessert, she asked if I wanted to take some home for later, and packed me a container without making a big deal about it. Driving home that night, I felt this weird mix of sad and hopeful at the same time. Sad because I'd never had what Margot's family had, but hopeful because now I knew that kind of family actually existed, and maybe someday I could build something like that for myself. 2 weeks passed after Judith sent the demand letter, and I was starting to think my mother would just ignore it completely. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, Judith called to tell me that my mother had finally hired a lawyer who reached out to discuss terms. I felt relieved that she'd actually gotten an attorney because it meant she was taking this seriously, even if she didn't want to. Judith said the fact that my mother hired legal help was actually progress, because it meant we could negotiate through professionals instead of dealing with her drama directly. I knew my mother would fight hard to keep the ring, but at least now we had a path forward. Judith said she would set up a meeting with my mother's attorney to talk about the ring, the baby situation, and getting both sides to agree to stop contacting each other. The attorneys worked out a time for the following week to have a mediation session. Judith explained that mediation meant we'd all sit in a room together with a neutral person who would help us reach an agreement. The agenda would cover returning my grandmother's ring, establishing that I had no responsibility for the baby, and setting up clear rules about contact between me and my mother going forward. I felt nervous thinking about being in the same room as my mother again, but Judith promised she would do most of the talking, and I just needed to stay calm and let her handle things. She told me not to react to whatever my mother said or did because that's what my mother wanted. A few days later, my aunt called and said she had something that might help my case. She'd been going through old text messages and found conversations between her and other family members about my mother's behavior over the years. She sent me screenshots showing messages from 5 years ago, where my aunt told my uncle that my mother was acting weird around my boyfriend at the time. There were messages from 3 years ago where my aunt expressed concern to my grandmother about my mother wearing inappropriate clothes to my college graduation. Most important were messages from 2 years ago, where my aunt told another relative that my mother seemed too interested in Robbie and kept finding excuses to text him or see him when I wasn't around. I forwarded everything to Judith, and she said this evidence was really valuable because it showed my mother's pursuit of Robbie wasn't just a one-time mistake, but part of a long pattern of inappropriate behavior. The weekend before the mediation session arrived, and I knew I needed to prepare myself mentally and emotionally for seeing my mother again. I practiced staying calm and not reacting no matter what she said. I reminded myself that Judith would be there to protect me and speak for me. I went through possible scenarios in my head and planned how I would handle each one. My hiking friends knew I had a big meeting coming up, and they took me out Saturday morning for a long trail walk. We hiked for 3 hours through the woods and up a steep hill that left us all breathing hard. Being outside in nature with people who cared about me helped clear my head and reminded me that I had support. By Sunday evening, I felt as ready as I was going to be. Monday morning came, and I put on professional clothes and drove to the office building where the mediation was scheduled. Judith met me in the lobby, and we rode the elevator up together. She reminded me one more time to stay quiet unless asked a direct question, and to let her do the talking. We walked into a conference room with a long table, and my mother was already sitting there with a man in a suit who must have been her attorney. My mother's eyes were red like she'd been crying, and she looked at me with this wounded expression. A woman introduced herself as the mediator and explained the ground rules for our session. Before the mediator could even finish explaining how things would work, my mother started crying and saying how hurt she was that her own daughter was treating her this way. The mediator held up her hand and said we needed to focus on finding practical solutions instead of assigning blame. My mother's attorney looked uncomfortable and quietly said something to my mother that made her stop talking. The mediator went through the agenda items one by one, starting with communication about the baby. Judith stated clearly that I had no legal obligation to be involved in this child's life, and that any necessary communication about the baby should go through Robbie directly, not through my mother. My mother immediately protested, saying I was the baby's sister and had a responsibility to be part of its life. Her own attorney leaned over and spoke quietly to her again. After a brief pause, my mother's attorney said they would accept those terms with the understanding that the door would remain open if I changed my mind in the future. The mediator wrote down the agreement that all baby-related communication would go through Robbie, and that I had no obligation to participate in the child's life. The mediator moved to the next item on her list and asked about the ring situation. My mother sat up straighter and said Robbie had given it to her as a gift, so it belonged to her now. Judith opened her folder and slid papers across the table showing my grandmother's will and a letter she wrote when she gave me the ring. The documents proved my grandmother gave it to me specifically before she died, and that I wore it during my time with Robbie. My mother's face went red and she started to argue, but her attorney put his hand on her arm to stop her. Judith explained calmly that the ring was my property and needed to be returned. The mediator asked if there was room for discussion, and Judith said we could negotiate terms for the return. My mother crossed her arms and looked away from everyone. Her attorney whispered something to her and she shook her head hard. This went on for what felt like forever, with papers being passed back and forth and quiet conversations between my mother and her lawyer. The mediator suggested we take a short break and everyone stood up to stretch. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below while Judith checked her phone. My mother stayed in her seat crying softly into a tissue. When we sat back down, the mediator asked if we could find a middle ground. Judith proposed that my mother return the ring within 30 days, and in exchange I would agree not to post anything else about the situation online. Both sides would sign something called a mutual agreement where neither of us could say bad things about the other, and if we did, there would be money penalties. My mother's attorney seemed interested and started writing notes. We spent the next hour going over exact wording and what counted as breaking the agreement. My mother kept trying to change things or add conditions, but Judith shut down each attempt. Finally, her attorney told her this was a fair offer and she should take it. The clock on the wall showed we had been there for 2 hours already. My mother wiped her eyes and said she would agree to return the ring in 30 days. Then she looked right at me and said she wanted to add one more thing. She said I should be required to come to the hospital when the baby was born and attend birthday parties and other big events. I felt my whole body tense up and I started to say no, but Judith spoke first. She said absolutely not, and that I had every right to set my own limits about involvement. The mediator nodded and said she supported my right to choose my own boundaries with the baby. My mother's attorney looked uncomfortable and quietly told my mother that she could not force me to have a relationship with the child. My mother argued that I was being selfish and the baby deserved to know his sister. Judith reminded everyone that Robbie was the father, and any issues about the baby should go through him. The mediator agreed and said this clause would not be added to the agreement. My mother looked like she wanted to keep fighting, but her attorney shook his head at her. She slumped back in her chair and said fine. The mediator wrote down the final terms and said both attorneys would prepare the formal paperwork within a week. She asked if there was anything else to discuss, and when no one spoke, she thanked us for coming. I stood up and gathered my things while Judith packed her folder. My mother sat there staring at the table and did not look up as we left. Walking out to the parking lot, I felt so tired, like I could barely stand up. But I also felt relieved that we finally had clear rules in writing with legal protection. Judith told me she would send me a copy of everything once it was finalized, and reminded me not to respond to any contact from my mother. I thanked her and drove home where my cats were waiting by the door. 3 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break at work. I saw that my mother had posted a status that said something about family members who leave you alone during hard times. She did not name me, but it was obvious who she meant. I took a screenshot right away and texted it to Judith. Judith responded within an hour saying she would contact my mother's attorney about the post. She reminded me that we had just agreed not to say bad things about each other publicly. I felt angry that my mother could not even wait until the papers were signed to start breaking the rules. Later that afternoon, Judith called to tell me that my mother's attorney had apologized and made her delete the post. He warned my mother that if she kept breaking the agreement before it was even official, then everything could fall apart. Judith said this small consequence was actually good because it showed my mother that actions had results. I felt a tiny bit better knowing that someone was holding her responsible for once. The next morning at work, I was at my desk going through emails when Augustine stopped by. He asked how I was handling everything and if the stress was affecting my work. I appreciated that he cared enough to check on me. He offered to move some of my project deadlines back if I needed more time. I told him I was okay and wanted to keep my work life stable because it helped me feel normal. He nodded and said the offer stood if I changed my mind. Having his support made me feel less alone, even though I did not need the deadline changes. That Thursday, I had my regular therapy appointment, and we spent the whole session talking about the mediation. I told my therapist about how Judith spoke for me and handled my mother's attempts to manipulate the situation. As we talked, I started to see that I felt strong during the mediation, instead of weak. Having Judith there to protect me showed me that I did not have to deal with my mother's games directly. My therapist said this was important growth, and that I was learning I could set limits without feeling guilty. By the end of the session, I felt proud of how I handled everything. The following Monday, a big envelope arrived at my office from Judith's law firm. Inside was the formal agreement with all the terms we discussed written out in legal language. I took my lunch break early and drove to Judith's office so we could go through it together. She walked me through every section explaining what each part meant. The ring return timeline was there, along with the rules about not posting online, and the money penalties if either of us broke those rules. Seeing everything in black and white made it feel more real and final. I signed my name at the bottom, and Judith witnessed my signature. She said my mother would sign her copy, and then we would each get a final version. I felt both relieved that this part was done, and sad that my relationship with my mother had come to legal contracts. That evening, my aunt called and asked how I was doing. I told her about getting the ring back, and she started crying on the phone. She said my grandmother would be so proud of me for standing up for myself. Then she told me stories about my grandmother and how she always wanted me to have that ring. My aunt explained that my grandmother dealt with the same attention-seeking behavior from my mother her whole life. She said my grandmother used to worry about how my mother competed with me for everything. Hearing this made me feel like I was doing the right thing by fighting for the ring. My aunt said my grandmother would understand why I had to use lawyers and paperwork to protect myself. We talked for almost an hour about family history I never knew, and by the end I felt more connected to my grandmother's memory than ever before. 2 days later, I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it and immediately recognized Robbie's writing style. He asked if I could give him advice about preparing to be a father, because he valued my opinion, and thought I would understand what he was going through. The complete lack of awareness made me stare at the screen in disbelief. He actually thought I would help him prepare for fatherhood with my mother. I did not even respond. I blocked the number and deleted the message. The realization hit me that I did not owe him anything, not my time or my wisdom or my emotional energy. He made his choices, and now he had to figure out the consequences on his own. I went back to my coffee feeling lighter for not engaging with his request. 3 days after that, my aunt called while I was at work. Her voice sounded worried, and she told me my mother had a pregnancy scare the night before. Some bleeding that sent her to the emergency room. My aunt explained that everything turned out okay but wanted to know if I wanted to reach out. I sat at my desk feeling a strange mix of concern and distance. Part of me worried about the baby who did not ask for any of this mess. Another part of me knew that reaching out directly would open a door I had worked hard to close. I told my aunt I was glad my mother was okay, and asked her to pass along a message wishing her health. My aunt understood and said she would relay it. I hung up feeling like I made the right choice for my own peace. That afternoon, Judith called with an update about the ring. She said the recovery was moving forward exactly on schedule and we should have it back within 2 weeks. Her voice sounded confident when she explained she also prepared a backup plan if my mother tried to delay or claim she lost it. Knowing Judith had thought through every possibility made me feel secure. I thanked her and told her how much I appreciated her help through this whole process. She said that was what good attorneys did and she was happy to support me. The following Monday, I flew to another city for a work conference that lasted 3 days. Being away from home and focused on my job felt like exactly what I needed. I attended sessions on regional management strategies and networked with colleagues from other offices. Several people complimented my recent project work, and one of the senior directors specifically mentioned how impressed he was with my client retention numbers. Hearing positive feedback about my professional performance reminded me that I had built real success, despite everything falling apart in my personal life. The conference gave me space to remember who I was outside of the family drama. On the second day of the conference, my neighbor called. She had a key to my townhouse for cat sitting, and she sounded apologetic when she told me my mother had shown up that morning. My neighbor said my mother rang the doorbell multiple times and tried to look through the windows. She did not answer the door like I had asked her to do if anyone came by. I thanked her for the heads up and for protecting my space. After we hung up, I immediately documented the attempted contact in an email to Judith with the date and time. This was another boundary violation to add to the pattern we were tracking. I felt grateful for my neighbor and for being out of town when my mother decided to show up were uninvited. The 30-day deadline for the ring return arrived on a Thursday. My mother's attorney had contacted Judith to arrange the handoff at her office that afternoon. I took a half day off work because I wanted to be there in person to see the ring returned with my own eyes. I did not trust that this would happen smoothly without me present. I arrived at Judith's office 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room trying to stay calm. Judith came out and brought me back to the conference room where we would meet. She reviewed the process one more time and assured me she would handle everything. My mother arrived 10 minutes late looking exhausted and heavily pregnant. Her belly was obvious now and she moved slowly like every step took effort. She sat down across from me without making eye contact. Her attorney placed a small ring box on the table and slid it toward my side. My mother kept her eyes down like she was the victim in this situation. I opened the box and verified it was my grandmother's ring with the small sapphire and the delicate gold band. Relief flooded through me seeing it again. I signed the receipt form documenting that I had received the ring back. Judith pulled out the final non-disparagement agreement with all the terms we had negotiated. Both sides would agree not to post about each other online or make public statements. If either of us violated the agreement, there would be financial penalties. My mother's attorney reviewed it with her, and she signed first. Then I signed my copy. Judith made copies for everyone, and we all signed the final versions. The whole process took maybe 20 minutes. My mother stood up as soon as the paperwork was done and left quickly without trying to talk to me. I watched her go and felt a small sense of mercy, that she did not try to have some dramatic conversation. Judith shook my hand and congratulated me on getting the ring back. I thanked her again for everything she had done. I walked out to my car holding the ring box carefully. I sat in the driver's seat and just stared at the ring for a long time. Then I started crying for the first time in weeks. The tears felt complicated and messy. I cried for my grandmother who would never know how much I fought to keep her ring. I cried for the family I thought I had, that turned out to be broken in ways I never imagined. I cried because getting the ring back felt like winning and losing at the same time, but mostly I cried from relief that this piece of my grandmother was mine again where it belonged. After about 10 minutes, I wiped my face and drove home. That evening, I called my aunt to tell her I had the ring back. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her, she started crying too. She said she was so proud of me for standing up for myself and for fighting for what my grandmother wanted me to have. Then she started sharing memories of my grandmother. She told me about how my grandmother used to worry about my mother's need for attention, how she saw the way my mother competed with me even when I was young. My aunt said my grandmother specifically gave me that ring because she wanted me to have something that was mine alone. Hearing these stories made me feel more connected to my grandmother's love and strength. My aunt and I talked for almost an hour about family history and how my grandmother would understand everything I had to do to protect myself. Before we hung up, we agreed to have dinner together soon, so she could see the ring in person. I went to bed that night with the ring box on my nightstand, feeling like I had reclaimed something important. The following week, I dove into the Henderson account presentation that had been sitting on my desk for months. I worked late 3 nights in a row putting together market analysis and growth projections that showed exactly how our services could double their revenue within 18 months. By Thursday, I had a presentation that felt solid and confident. The client meeting went better than expected, and they signed a 3-year contract worth more than any deal our region had closed all year. Augustine called a team meeting the next afternoon and announced the Henderson win in front of everyone. He said my work on this project showed exactly the kind of leadership our company valued, and that I should be proud of what I accomplished while dealing with personal challenges. My coworkers clapped and a few came up after to congratulate me. I felt genuinely good about maintaining my professional life even when everything else felt complicated. 2 months passed with work keeping me busy and my personal life staying quiet. My aunt called one evening and said she had something to give me. I drove to her house the next day, and she handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a baby shower invitation with teddy bears and pastel blue ribbons printed across the top. The shower was scheduled for 3 weeks away at a restaurant I had never heard of. I stared at the card, feeling mostly empty inside. My aunt watched my face and asked what I wanted to do. I told her I would send a gift through the registry, but I would not attend. She nodded and said she understood completely. I went home and found the registry online and ordered a basic baby monitor and some neutral-colored onesies. The total came to about $80, which felt appropriate for a situation this strange. A week after I sent the gift, my phone buzzed with a text from someone I had not heard from in over a year. It was Jake, who used to be friends with both me and Robbie before everything fell apart. The message said Robbie wanted to talk about boundaries once the baby arrived, and asked if I would be willing to meet. I stared at the text for a long time before responding that I would meet once at a neutral location to discuss practical matters only. Jake sent back the name of a coffee shop halfway between where Robbie lived and my townhouse. We agreed on the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. I told my therapist about the meeting in our session that week, and she helped me prepare what boundaries I needed to communicate clearly. I wrote down 3 main points on my phone so I would not forget them during the conversation. Saturday morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 5 minutes early and ordered tea while I waited. Robbie walked in exactly on time, looking uncomfortable in jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. He had gained weight and his hair was longer than he used to keep it. We sat down at a corner table away from other customers, and he immediately started apologizing for reaching out. I cut him off and said we were here to discuss practical boundaries, not to rehash the past. He nodded and folded his hands on the table. I laid out my terms clearly. I had no obligations to this child whatsoever. I would not be called aunt or included in family events. Any future contact had to go through him directly, and only if absolutely necessary. He agreed to everything without arguing. Then he did something that surprised me. He said he had not thought through the consequences of his actions, and that he was weak and selfish and destroyed something good. The apology felt genuine even though it changed nothing about what happened. I told him I accepted his apology because I wanted to close this chapter with as much peace as possible. We finished our coffee in silence and left through separate doors. 1 month later, my aunt sent me a text at 6 in the morning saying my mother had gone into labor early and delivered a healthy baby boy. She attached a photo of a tiny wrinkled newborn with dark hair wearing a blue hospital hat. I looked at the picture and felt like I was observing someone else's family situation rather than my own. The distance felt strange but also protective. I texted my aunt back saying I was glad everyone was healthy. 3 days after the birth, my email inbox showed a new message from my mother's address. The subject line said, "Please read this." I opened it and found 6 paragraphs about how she wanted me to meet my half-brother and be part of his life. She wrote that family was important and that I would regret missing out on knowing him. I did not respond, but I forwarded the entire message to Judith. She sent back a brief reply within an hour, reminding my mother that our agreement specified minimal contact that respected my boundaries. In my next therapy session, I brought up the complicated feelings about having a half-brother who was also my ex-fiancé's son. My therapist listened carefully and then said something that helped me feel less guilty. She explained that I could wish the child well without being involved, and that protecting my peace mattered more than meeting other people's expectations. We talked about how I did not choose this situation, and I was not responsible for fixing it. 3 months went by with no contact from my mother, except for one attempt through her attorney. The message asked if I would be willing to do 1 joint therapy session to work toward possible reconciliation down the road. I was surprised she was in therapy at all. After thinking about it for a week, I told Judith I would agree to 1 session with strict ground rules. We scheduled it for the following month with a neutral counselor who specialized in family estrangement. The day of the session, I arrived 10 minutes early at the therapist's office building. My mother showed up right on time, looking tired and older than I remembered. The counselor was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a calm presence. She explained the ground rules about respectful communication, and then asked my mother to start by sharing what brought her to therapy. My mother talked for almost 15 minutes about feeling afraid of getting older and losing her importance in people's lives. She admitted that she had competed with me since I was young, because she felt threatened by my youth and success. She said sleeping with Robbie was the worst thing she ever did, and she understood why I cut her off. It was the most honest she had ever been with me about her motivations and insecurities. The counselor asked how I felt hearing this, and I said it helped me understand her choices even though it did not erase the damage. The counselor asked what I needed moving forward, and I explained that 1 honest conversation could not fix years of damage. I told my mother that trust gets rebuilt through actions over time, not through words in a therapy room. She nodded and wiped her eyes with a tissue. We agreed to try staying in minimal contact with strict rules about respecting my limits. My aunt would be the go-between for any updates or necessary communication. My mother agreed to stop showing up at my home or workplace. I agreed to exchange occasional brief messages through my aunt about major life events. The counselor documented our agreement and scheduled a follow-up session in 6 months to check progress. We left through different exits, and I felt relieved to have clear boundaries finally established in writing. 6 months passed, and I found myself thinking about the canceled wedding less and less. One afternoon, I contacted the photographer who was supposed to shoot my original wedding day. I explained that I wanted to do a personal creative project instead. We met at a coffee shop, and I shared my idea about documenting my rebuilt life as a way to turn something painful into art. She loved the concept immediately, and suggested we spend a full day shooting at my townhouse and around the neighborhood. The following Saturday, she arrived with her equipment, and we spent hours capturing my space. She photographed my cats lounging in the sunny living room windows. We took pictures of my hiking boots by the door and my work awards on the shelf. She shot me cooking in my kitchen and reading on my couch and tending the small herb garden on my balcony. We walked through the arts district and captured me at my favorite coffee shop and bookstore. The whole experience felt healing and empowering. She edited the photos into a beautiful series that celebrated my independence and strength. I framed several prints and hung them in my townhouse as reminders of how far I had come. A year after calling off my wedding, I took stock of my life and felt genuinely proud. My grandmother's ring sat safely in my jewelry box where it belonged. My career continued thriving, and I had just received another promotion. My friendships felt real and supportive. My home belonged entirely to me and reflected my taste and personality. My mother and I maintained distant but civil contact through my aunt with occasional brief updates. She sent a photo of my half-brother on his first birthday, and I looked at it without feeling much emotion either way. Robbie focused on being a father to his son, and we had no direct contact. Some family members still avoided me at gatherings, while others apologized for believing my mother's lies. I accepted that I could not control how others viewed the situation. My therapist and I started working on dating again when I felt ready. I went on a few casual dates with people from my hiking group and enjoyed getting to know new people without pressure. I felt excited about my future in ways I never experienced before the betrayal. The whole mess had forced me to build a life based on my own choices rather than trying to please others. My grandmother's ring reminded me that I came from strong women who survived hard things. I had survived something that could have destroyed me and become stronger through the process. I felt proud of the boundaries I set and the life I built, and the woman I became through all that painful growth. So yeah, that is the whole thing. Nothing too fancy, just a quick story to share. Thanks for listening. It really does feel like chatting with a friend. Come back next time if you want to hang out again.